Would you have voted for TARP or any of the stimulus packages?
No.
Okay. I guess that's it.
unless you want more.
No, that's good.
Okay. Do you believe energy independence is compatible with free trade?
Yes.
What immediate actions need to be taken to turn the economy around and to stabilize the dollar?
Start to control spending by putting tough enforceable spending caps in place on the entire federal budget. Start to reduce spending by taking a hard look at eliminating agencies such as the Department of Education that I don't believe we need and which I think can have functions that are performed by other entities, especially at the state level. Having gotten spending under control, the single best way to turn our economy around is to engage in broad-based tax cuts and both given our current tax system, and I know that's something we're going to talk about later, but given the current tax regime, broad-based tax cuts in both the corporate rate and the individual rate is the single best way to rejuvenate our economy. I am not an expert on monetary policy, although having gotten to know Peter Schiff over the last year, I've spent a lot of time talking to him about it, and I think that we need to have a very different monetary policy that doesn't print money for the sake of stimulating an economy in a way that is ultimately not real. So those are the things that I would do.
Do you believe it is politically possible to undo the entitlements that are bankrupting this country? And if so, what course would you recommend to undo this legislation?
I don't think it's politically possible to undo them. Not entirely. Not if by undo you mean eliminate them. I don't think that's possible. What I do think it's possible to do is to start to control the growth in that spending, to start to isolate the liabilities that we do have, and then taking Social Security as an example. It's not realistic to eliminate Social Security. There are people today who rely on it, who need it, who have, for better or for worse, paid into a system that many people who are relying on. What we need to do, using that just as an example, is to start to isolate that liability based on people who are relying on it and who are soon to be relying on it, and then move to a system for everyone else who is younger that takes us away from something that's like that kind of an entitlement. That's more of a free market-based approach. But even in that, as an example, you're not going to get rid of Social Security altogether. So I don't think it's possible to eliminate them altogether, but I do think it's possible to start to isolate the liability that we've incurred so that we can stop the bleeding and change programs in a way that stop making them an entitlement and start moving towards more of a free market-based system.
What do you believe the federal government's role is regarding the Second Amendment?
Regarding the Second Amendment, to stay as far away from impinging on our rights as humanly possible. I mean, I am a firm supporter of the Second Amendment. When Judge Sotomayor, for example, was being considered for the United States Supreme Court, I was the first person in Connecticut who was running for office to say that she should not be confirmed, and she shouldn't be a Supreme Court justice, in part because she treats the Second Amendment as though it were a second-class citizen. So I think the role of the federal government is to stay as far away from impinging on our rights as possible, and they ought to make sure they treat the Second Amendment with the same kind of respect that they treat the First Amendment, for example.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts regarding the Patriot Act?
On balance, that it was necessary to protect our country. What scares me about the Patriot Act is that it has so many ways in which that power can be abused, and I think that where we need to work very carefully is to circumscribe the exercise of that power in a way that doesn't trample on individual rights. But I do believe we are in a war on terror, and I do believe that the Patriot Act is a useful tool in fighting that war. But that's a prime example of where the devil is in the details, and where the specifics and how the power is used, how widely you craft the power, is really where the rubber meets the road.
Do you believe a state has the right to nullify a federal law?
Yes. If the federal law is not consistent with the Constitution. Now, whether as a practical matter that would ever happen is a different story. But from a purely constitutional perspective, I am a firm believer that there are powers that have been expressly enumerated to the federal government. Everything else under the 10th Amendment has been delegated to the states. And from that point of view, I think they have the power.
What are your feelings on the eminent domain case?
I thought it was poorly decided, and I think it was an abridgment of individual property rights.
Thank you.
Going forward, what do you believe our policy should be on the war on terror?
To fight it as aggressively as we can on every front possible, including through the use of the Patriot Act, but to do so as carefully as we can to avoid trampling on individual rights. But I think it is a multifaceted war. I think it is a war. I think the administration is wrong to call it anything other than what I believe it is, which is a war, because we are dealing with individuals who are committed to destroying our way of life as we know it.
Will you campaign on repealing the recently passed health care legislation?
Yes, in fact, I was the first person in Connecticut to sign the Club for Growth's pledge, saying that if I'm elected, I will repeal the federal takeover of the health insurance bill. And in fact, not every 5th district candidate has signed that pledge. But I was the first in Connecticut to sign it, and very happily so. I think we need to do health care reform. I think there are ways we can do it, but we can do it in a way that doesn't create a new entitlement, expand existing entitlements like Medicaid, and grow the size of the federal government.
Okay. One candidate to another. You're a Republican in a blue state. Connecticut is pretty much the capital of the insurance industry. Here in Connecticut, there are a lot of people who are being considered for jobs that are being created because of that new health care. You're going to be in rooms full of voters who just may have gotten a job after waiting for a very long time. How are you going to convince them that repealing the health care legislation and costing them that job is actually going to be good for them?
Well, two things. First of all, Tim, I disagree with the premise of your question. I don't think this health care bill is going to create jobs for anybody in Connecticut. I think it's actually going to destroy jobs for people in Connecticut. But beyond that, even if you're correct in your premise, I would go to them and say, look, we've got to do what's right for the greater good. And there is very little in this bill that's right for the greater good. And I'm sorry you don't like the answer. I'm sorry that you may have a narrow self-interest in your little piece of this pie, but it's not going to help healthcare. It's not going to help increase the quality of care. It's not going to make our government more streamlined. It's going to do the reverse. And I think it's going to result in rationing and in an ever-growing federal government that we already can't afford. So I'm sorry if you don't like it, but we've got to get rid of it. That's what I would say to them.